Welcome. Today I am joined by our friend, artist, podcaster, community bringer together, Andy Driscoll. You're listening to Open Here, a podcast produced by Pack TV. I'm Tiff Phillips. Let's get started. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So good to have you. Now, you wear many a hat, so I really would like to know, first of all, what's your favorite hat to wear?
Oh.
You have so many in the community. You do so much. I would love to know, like, what do you live for?
I think... even just in art, I think I always worked better when I had multiple things going on. Because if I got bored with one, or if I hit kind of an impasse with one, I could kind of switch gears and like change my mindset, which would kind of help me subconsciously work on whatever the other problem is. So I kind of like the fact that I think my favorite thing is that I don't do just one thing and I can kind of bounce around, and it keeps things from getting redundant or boring. My days are very rarely the same. So I think that's my favorite part, is that I don't do one thing.
I was going to ask you, like, what a normal day looks like for you.
Oh.
But it's like you answered that question.
Well, no, I mean, there's still some normalcy, like in the pandemic, everyone's working from home, and I was trying to work from home, and I can't do that. I don't function well that way. I'll be like, well, I'm going to go take a nap, and then like 4 hours later. So, I usually get up and get out of the house. I try to do it at the same time, so I have some sort of set schedule, and I'll go down and work on some, Facebook posts, social media things, then answering emails, and then kind of pushing whatever promotion I need to do for whatever events are coming up to try and keep that in the spotlight. And then usually after that is where my days get interesting, whether it's trying to book new events, recording podcasts, depending on which podcasts we need to record. Having three, it's kind of interesting. Filming of our YouTube show, and traveling to different events. So like, I'd say usually about 4 o'clock in the afternoon is where my day kind of really takes a turn and never goes exactly the same way.
Right. How much of that is promotion? Like, you do a lot of kind of advertising for all the events and stuff going on. How much, like, what percentage of that is your life?
80, including my social life. It's weird. I think all small business owners are on 24/7.
Right.
You're always doing something. You're always cooking up an idea. Even if you're out with friends, you're going to run into people. I went to see a concert at Soundcheck Studios in Pembroke, and it was one of those people. I'm like, people tell me I need some downtime. I'm gonna go, catch a show, and then inevitably I run into some people who are asking about the podcast, or asking about the YouTube show, or asking about this, and send me an email, and we'll touch base later. And so I mean, even when you're not working, you're still kind of working, which can be really tough sometimes.
Can you go to the grocery store and not be recognized, or no?
I was out to lunch with my kids one day. I always tell people I'm famous on 2 streets. If you're in downtown Plymouth, I'm going to run into someone I know. And so me and my kids were out to lunch one day, and my youngest looks at me and goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And she's like, "No one said hi to you in 10 minutes. I'm just making sure you're all right."
I'm a little wounded, actually.
Yeah. And then Inebri-Art set up at Plymouth Pride last year, and Zoe, my youngest, gave me a hard time because she was recognized more times than I was. So it's weird because I don't always realize how strange it is until like someone from the outside is, So funny story. I was going on a date with this woman for the first time, and I'm like, I have to ask you a question that's going to make me sound like an egomaniac. And she's like, okay. I'm like, do you want to go somewhere where people are going to know me and like constantly interrupt, or do you want to go someplace quiet? And she's like, let's go someplace quiet. I'm like, all right. I'm like, I know it makes me sound crazy. We walked in the door, and someone waiting to be seated turned around and like, hey, Andy, what's going on? I'm like, I told you it happens. And it's just one of those things.
At least you had like evidence, that. Like,
yeah. So I'm not a psycho. Yeah.
Blowing smoke.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Inebri-Art. It's such a unique concept. Can you explain for people who don't know what Inebri-Art is?
Yeah, so that, I think one of the hardest things I've ever had to do was describe Inebri-Art.
Right.
Because it is so varied. What we have settled on is we are events marketing promotion for mostly bars, breweries, and restaurants, as well as online content creation. I feel like that sums it up fairly accurately. But so Inebri-Art started back in 2011. It didn't have a name. And it was just a drink and draw, like a little club for artists to get together and sit on a bar stool and have a drink and just sketch and kind of, decompress a little bit. And now we have vendor markets and podcasts and YouTube channels and mug paintings and comedy shows and just
you have a full-fledged brand. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's nice to see how far it's spreading. Last night someone recognized the old Colony Cast logo on my hat and started asking me about it. Wow. I've had friends in Rhode Island. It was about a year ago. We had an Inebri-Art face mask made up, and she was wearing an Inebri-Art face mask in Rhode Island. Someone's like, "How do you know Inebri-Art?" So it's like it's getting out there.
Yeah.
So
how far do you want to take it?
And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is getting rid of, I don't want to say it's a stigma because that's the wrong word, the idea that we're a Plymouth thing.
Right.
Because especially with the podcasts, it's way more than that. I'd say 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of our downloads go to India. We just got back from Vegas to record Bar Talk. I got to interview a illustrator from, I think he's living in Portland, Oregon now. And it was one of the weirdest experiences because, pre-interview, I'm always like, oh, this is who we are and this is how we got started. And we started as a drink and draw, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, I know. And I'm like, what do you mean you know? And he's like, I've listened to your podcast.
Wow.
And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, you had Wax Taylor on. I'm a big Wax Taylor friend and fan. And a friend of mine sent me a link to it. And so I went to see who else you had on. You had Doc Hammer, and he's like, he's a friend of mine. So I went and listened to that one. He's like, so I know who you are. And I was just like, but what do you mean? Like, it just wouldn't register that this person has no reason to know who I am other than the show. And it somehow made its way to him.
So I got to ask, do you love it? Do you still love it after? I know you put a lot of work into it. It's got to be a labor of love for you. Yeah.
If you didn't love it, it's any small business owner. If you don't love doing it, you're an idiot because there's no real get rich quick schemes that work. So if you're not passionate about it and you don't love doing it, we have 2 rules. And in Inebri-Art, everybody is included. And it has to be fun. And that last one is always like, because if it's not fun, what's the point of us doing it?
Yeah.
Now it's a little different because now, we're making a living at it opposed to just, in the beginning, we made nothing.
Yeah.
It was like, if we broke even, that's great. But yeah, so it is something I love to do. And I've always said that some of my favorite interviews are when a stranger comes in and a friend leaves.
I love that.
So
I love the idea of meeting new people. It's just finding out their stories. People are so intricate and fascinating. I love that. So you said, it's not just about Plymouth, but you love Plymouth. I mean, this is your hometown, really. So what is so special about Plymouth? What about Plymouth?
Wow. Okay. Well, for me, it was a place I've always traveled to. In elementary school, we came down on field trips. When we were in high school, we used to come down, hang out, and go to the end of the jetty and cause trouble. As a parent, we used to come down with the kids and walk along the waterfront and get some ice cream. And so it's always been this place that I've kind of been drawn to. And I think part of it is it's got a beautiful view down by the ocean. And there's all parts of Plymouth, but I definitely love living downtown.
Right.
And since I've moved here, I've been here about 10 years. It started off where I'm like, I always feel like I'm on vacation because I can just, go to the top deck of Cabbie Shack and sit and have a beer and just look at the ocean. But now there's so much going on, and every time I kind of like turn over a rock, there's like a whole new community.
Right.
You know, I came down here and there's a rock I turned over and it's like, wow, there's an amazing art community here. And then I got involved in some other things and I turned over a rock and I'm like, wow, there's an amazing foodie community here. And they all work together, even though all these restaurants are like on top of each other and should be fighting constantly. And then you turn over another rock and you're like, there's some amazing, amazing musicians here. And then another rock and you're like, oh, there's some of the best comics I've ever heard in my life here. And it's for some reason, it's just like this weird focal point.
Where'd you grow up?
Whitman.
Me too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Whitman kid.
Whitman Hanson, yeah.
Yep, I went to Whitman Hanson for about a year. But what year did you graduate?
93.
Oh, okay. So I'm a little further on. I graduated in 2003.
Oh, okay. Thanks for making me feel old. That's awesome.
I did not mean
Funny story, though. I had Chicky from Clay Chick on the show one day, and she was talking about how, she starts like whispering. She's like, I'm really old. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And she's like, I'm definitely older than you. And I'm like, well, how old are you? And I forget the time. It was probably like 45, 44 or something like that. And I'm like, me too. And she's like, I graduated in 9th year. I'm like, me too. She's like, from Whitman. I'm like, me too. And then like realized we had all these friends in common.
That's crazy.
And like hung out in very similar circles. And for some reason, I just never knew her.
Talk about a cool concept. Chicky's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah, she's great. I love Chicky.
It's got to say about Plymouth, there's some really cool professions out there that people have made for themselves.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about your podcasts. I know you talked a little bit about Bar Talk and Old Colony. Do you want to kind of like explain what each of them are?
Sure, and I can probably do that best by telling like how they happen.
Yeah, sure.
So Inebri-Art, I got interested in podcasting through my now business partner, Fish, and he's like, oh, check this out. I think you'll like it. And it's a podcast called No Such Thing as a Fish. And it's great. And then like any good addiction, like one led to another, led to another, led to another. And then I kind of got to be like, those might be fun to do. And I said to Fish, I'm like, I want to start an art podcast. And he just looks at me and goes, art's visual, that's stupid. And I'm like, all right, fair enough. And then I was home one day watching a YouTube clip, and it was, I'm not even sure what it was shot for, but it was Chris Rock, Ricky Gervais, Jerry Seinfeld, and Louis C.K. talking about how they write jokes, why some work clean, why some don't, and the whole creative process. And I'm like, that's it. It's not art people. I want to talk to creative people. Mm-hmm. Lo and behold, the Inebri-Art podcast was born. So we started off with our friends, and then friends of friends, and then friends of friends of friends. And we wanted to bring in some of the people who have been supportive to us. So we brought Tatum from the Craft Beer Cellar in, Carl Heine from New World Tavern. And then we were concerned because it was kind of departing from the initial talking to creative people. But we wanted to highlight Plymouth and what we loved about the area. So that's how the Old Colony Cast got born into life. And it never clicked because we tried to do it as in an interview show, which it's not really. And we were running a Krampus scavenger hunt one year, and this young lady happened to be at the place we were starting, decided she wanted to take part. Her and her friend ended up winning, and kind of afterwards, everyone was celebrating, and we started talking to her, and she had an interest in history, and she's a lifelong Plymouth person, and she loved podcasts. And I'm like, you should come on the show as a guest. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, you should come on and co-host. And Hannah came on and has never left.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of how it evolved into now. We were at New World Tavern one day playing trivia, and Carl Heine, who we've been working with the better part of a decade now, came up to us, and he's like, Neil deGrasse Tyson? And we're like, yeah. He's like, he does a podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, Star Talk. I like that one. He's like, I want to do that. I'm like, why do you want to be on Star Talk? And he's like, no, I want to do Bar Talk. And just walked away. And me and Fish were like, oh, that's a really good idea. And then, within a few short weeks, we contacted Jordan at Speedwell, and we're like, we want to do a podcast about what it's like to be in the bar and restaurant industry. And Carl and Jordan were the hosts. And then Dan Mahoney came on as a guest one time and never left. And so that's just how that's evolved. And then that became a YouTube show. And so everything we do is kind of accidental.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's how the most beautiful things happen. I love that. So for people who are wanting to start a podcast but are a little intimidated, do you have any tips or tricks that you have for them? Any advice?
Okay. I have advice for people starting anything, and it's one of my favorite bits of advice. Don't. Because everything is work. And if me telling you not to do something is going to deter you in any way, shape, or form, then you're not going to do it. Yeah, especially you have to be committed to it. There, you know, the pod fade's real. Yeah, there's so many people that I always say it's like between 25 and 30 episodes. If you make it that far, you're usually okay.
Yeah.
But it can be really grueling. And there's a lot of times where we sacrifice doing something we want to do the show.
Right.
And, you know, we have 3 shows. We put out 8 episodes a month, which is a lot.
It is a lot.
And, you know, we have no one to blame but ourselves. But in actual advice, sound quality is number 1. Rule number 2, don't do a boatload of inside jokes. You know, you have to think that every single episode you're putting out is someone's first episode. And if you start making a ton of inside jokes, and we had to be really cognizant of that with Bar Talk because it's all industry people from Plymouth. So there's a lot of like jokes and inside jokes and references in the early episodes. And I'm like, we can't do that. Right. You know, this episode, these go way further than Plymouth. So that's important. Have a clear elevator pitch. You know, when it comes to your show, people can be like, oh, what's your show about? And if you're like, well, you know, we talk politics and wrestling and cooking and cartoons. No, it's no good. Have a very clear, you know, mission statement. You know, Inebri-Art is creative people about what they do and how they do it. Bar Talk is a hospitality industry support group. Old Colony Cast is Plymouth and surrounding areas. So it's like it can boil it down, tell you, and you know everything you need to know.
Right.
And let's see, sound quality, no inside jokes, clear message. Oh, schedule. Set a schedule, stick to it.
Right.
And it's better to underpromise and overdeliver than to be like, I'm going to do this 4 times a week, and then you do it maybe once a week.
We talked about promotion before. Now, how do you get it popular? How do you get the word out?
That's the $64,000 question.
Yeah.
Building an audience is the number one hardest thing to do, and the number one reason why people stop, which is why if you don't love it, don't do it.
Right.
Because if you go, oh, we're gonna make a ton of money at this, or you know, you're not.
Right.
We enjoy the fringe benefits that come along with doing it. So that's always been the best part. We're now starting to see money, which is even better. But it's almost the reverse of TV, where you make a product and then you get the ratings. Where podcasting, you need to have those 30 episodes out before it even really I mean, of course, if you're a famous person, that's different. But you know, if you have 3 episodes out and someone goes back and downloads your entire back catalog, that's still only 3 downloads.
Right.
Where now if someone does that for Inebri-Art, we'll get a spike of 200-300 episodes in a day, because then that's just one person going back. And so it's very much like a snowball effect. The more you have, the more downloads you get. The more downloads you get, the more the aggregates will recommend you to other people. So you know, just keep producing and trying to make the best quality product you can. Find a niche that works for you, that isn't overpopulated. Like if someone came to me like, oh, I'm going to do a true crime podcast, I'd be like, don't waste your time.
Right.
You know,
there's so many.
There's so many.
Yeah.
Or like I've had friends be like, I'm going to start a wrestling podcast. I'm like, oh, what are you going to do? And they're like, oh, we're going to talk about what happened on last night's episode of Raw, whatever. I'm like, why would I listen to you guys when I can listen to an actual wrestler talk about that? So it's like, be aware of who's in your market and what you're really trying to do. and then go where your listeners are. And that's why we're in Vegas at the Bar and Restaurant Expo. That was a perfect audience for, bar talk.
How did that go, by the way?
It was amazing. It was so much fun. I'm not a gambler, so Vegas is kind of lost on me a bit. And I feel like we should have flown back an early flight opposed to staying all day Thursday. But it was an amazing experience. We got to walk the convention hall and meet a lot of people, and we got some sponsors, which is great. And we had Chef Duffy from Bar Rescue on.
No way.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
He was so cool, so down to earth, and fit the show perfectly. He monopolized the time a little bit, but he's a celebrity. That's what
right.
There was over 100 people in the crowd. They weren't all there for us. Right. I'm not foolish, but it sounds like we may be going back next year.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Keep it going. Now, aside from your collection of podcasts, what are some of your favorites?
Oh, wait. No, that was before. I'm like, I mentioned Sawbones, but I'm like, that was before we started recording. So Sawbones is a great one. It's a medical guide to misguided medicine, a marital guide to misguided medicine, which I said, it's like that short, soundbite that describes the show perfectly. Mm-hmm. It's all about medical history and the weird things that happen. Let's see. No Such Thing as a Fish, which I mentioned, is a great one. They're researchers for a British panel show. So it's kind of like really obscure trivia. What else am I listening to now? Monster Talk.
What's that about?
Monster Talk is a show by skeptics who don't believe in any cryptozoology. Like, they're not out hunting for Bigfoot, but they love Bigfoot and they love what Bigfoot means and the Loch Ness Monster. So it's all like the real science behind it, and they're interviewing people. Some are believers and some aren't believers, and they're taking a very skeptical look. And how do these things like evolve over time, and how do they come up? And it's really fascinating. It's almost more sociological than it is, but it's with a love of horror and monsters. And they've actually been on our show.
Oh, have they really?
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been a fun episode.
Yeah, they were super cool. They're so nice.
That up. Yeah. So we are a podcast that primarily talks about pop culture. Mm-hmm. We pride ourselves in being nerds. So do you have any TV shows or movies that you're really into right now?
Yeah. I used to own a comic book shop, so I'm an uber nerd.
I love it.
So I am going to take that and kind of spin it off, because I feel like I don't watch TV anymore. Movies, I love nerd movies.
Yeah.
Marvel, can't wait for Doctor Strange to come out.
Because you don't have time to watch TV, or because you're just not interested in the content that's on there? I just
find that their content is kind of meh.
Yeah.
I feel like online streaming is so much better.
Yeah.
But there's some really, really interesting things out there that people don't necessarily know about. I shouldn't say that. Some of them are very popular. Every morning I watch Good Mythical Morning.
Yeah.
Every week I watch Critical Role.
What's that about?
It is 8 voice actors. Some of them are previous child stars. One was in Mr. Mom. One girl was like one of those add-on kids in Growing Pains, I think. So it's 8 voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons.
That's an incredible concept.
It's unreal. It's evolved. I mean, it's been going like 7 years now. They started off just kind of as a show on someone else's show, and now they're like a multi-million-dollar company, and Stephen Colbert is going to be on the show. And
that's awesome. It's
daunting to get into, because it's literally more hours than The Simpsons.
Really?
Yeah.
I love the concepts that like seem like somebody like got drunk and was just like, hey, I wonder if this would be funny. Like,
well, I mean, there are those out there. There's a great YouTube show, which they don't produce anymore because she's gone on to other things, Hannah Hart, and it was called My Drunk Kitchen.
I remember My Drunk Kitchen.
Oh,
yes.
So good. I watch cooking shows on YouTube, like Sam the Cooking Guy is really good. There's another weekly show where they do die-cast racing. Mm-hmm. not a car guy. I don't know why it's compelling, but it's compelling. I really enjoy it. And they just race die-cast cars down a track.
That's all.
That's all they do. And they've like worked a little bit of storyline into it. And yeah, it's so simple. That's one of my favorite things is you can have an incredibly simple idea. And if you do it well, there's a couple of brothers, I want to say they're out of like Finland or something like that. And they started the Marble Olympics, which they basically just made tracks and like different games with marbles. And it's huge. It's so huge now that John Oliver last week tonight sponsored an entire season of it. In the beginning of COVID, they're talking about how sports weren't happening anymore and the alternates and so
competitive marble run. That's
awesome.
Yeah,
it's so stupid, but you'd be like, I just watched 40 minutes of these marbles, quote unquote, competing. Right. And there's so much good content from so little.
Yeah.
Which is that you ask like what's good advice for someone who's starting is just have a good idea.
Yeah.
We started with a $60 mic, which we weren't using properly.
Right.
And just learn as you go.
Right.
Just make for the sake of making, and you'll get better.
Yeah.
And that's all there is to it.
Now, we talked about podcasts, but like, what advice would you have for someone who's just working that 9-to-5 job that just wants to live their dream and just is afraid to make the jump?
Oh, like as a full-time?
Yeah.
Into full-time?
Yeah.
Oh, get laid off. So back at the beginning of 2020, me and Fish were kind of having a conversation about how busy we were getting, which is really funny looking back at it now. And it's kind of like, well, who's going to be the first guy to quit their day job and make this a full-time thing? And what's that going to look like? And 6 weeks later, I was laid off.
Wow. So that decision was made for you.
Yeah. So then it kind of, at the time I was furloughed, so I thought I was going back. And I realized that it was difficult at that time because no one knew what was going to happen.
Right.
I didn't know if we could ever do mug paintings again. But it's really tough because if I didn't get laid off, I'd probably still be working there, and Inebri-Art probably wouldn't be as big as it is now. It's part of ripping that Band-Aid off, and that's just incredibly difficult. You definitely need some sort of outside support.
Right.
You need that partner who's going to be like, hey, I understand there's going to maybe be some rough times in here, and maybe we're going to have to cancel a vacation in order to make ends meet while you get things started. But it's not the number of people who want to start businesses or do start businesses and are gone almost immediately. I mean, it's because it's hard. It's a lifestyle. And Tatum Stewart coined a phrase, the wantrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to own their own business.
Right.
But if you can't put in a 35-hour, 40 work week at your job without kind of not having drive to do more, you're not ready to own a business.
Right.
Because you're going to work 70, 80 hours a week.
Yeah. I mean, do you notice when you work 70, 80 hours a week? Do you feel it?
I notice when I don't.
Right.
Because I'm not a sit around kind of person. Last year I went through some personal things and decided that I would just throw myself into work instead of dealing with them, I guess. I'm sure it's super healthy.
Sure.
But no, so it became like work was therapeutic for me. I really enjoy what I do. Don't get me wrong, there's some very boring, repetitive things that you have to do. But I don't not work well.
Right.
Sitting around, or I'll take a day off for some reason, and halfway through I get antsy and I'll be like, oh, I should be doing this, or I start to feel guilty, or
right.
We don't get quite the ticket sales on something we want to. I'm like, oh, it's because I went to see the movie, But we get to do so much fun stuff,
right.
And when we started doing the podcast, we'd have musicians in, and they'd come and play some songs that we would record, and they'd be like, oh, thank you. And we're like, we're just throwing a little mini concert for ourselves. Don't thank us, We've gotten to watch the joust at King Richard's Fair from the King's Box.
What?
We've gotten a private tour of the Lizzie Borden house. So, I mean, like, those are cool things just would have never happened before, but, they're quote-unquote work.
Right.
When we shoot Bar Talk Day Drinking, we're in a closed bar, and we're filming people drink, and they're our friends, and we're eating pizza and having laughs, and every once in a while I'll just turn to Fish and be like, remember, this is our job.
Right.
Like, we literally get paid to do this, and it's just ridiculous. So for me, I think it's really hard to determine when I'm not working and kind of understand that work is work and fun is fun, because like the lines blur. It
must be hard to have that balance though of like, okay, I really need a break.
Usually people are like, you need a break.
Oh, they need a
break. They're like, you can't schedule yourself like that. I'm like, oh yeah, I can. I still have another hour today that I can, book a meeting or something. But it doesn't all feel like work. Like this doesn't feel like work.
Right.
Tonight we're running a comedy show, so I have to go and we make sure things are set up and we check the people in, and then I hang out and have a beer and watch comics. Like, that's work, but it doesn't feel like it.
Right.
I get to go to half dozen comedy shows every month as my job. So, people pay to go do that. I get paid to do it. So it can be super stressful when it's not going right, but when it goes right, the night flies by. It doesn't, it's a very weird lifestyle, and that's all I can call it, is a lifestyle, because it's, especially like, I've mentioned her before, Tatum. She's kind of like my mentor, a phenomenal businesswoman, and she's a partner that full on buys in, is like, I understand there's going to be sacrifices, but, I understand this is how you live. Right. And getting that kind of buy-in from a partner is really complicated.
Yeah.
And it's tough. Yeah. But it's just a strange life,
Right.
Frequently I'm like, my life is so weird.
Do you ever think you see yourself where you are right now?
Kinda. I don't know if I could see myself other ways. Like, I've worked 9-to-5 jobs. I've been middle management. I've worked in marketing and sat at a desk. But I've always, even during those things, I was working on my art and trying to get my art into art shows. And, I grew up on stage and theater and, marching band and jazz band and concert band. So I haven't always kind of had a quote unquote normal, existence. And, it's, I don't know. I guess I don't know if I could see myself just, get up, go to work, come home, sit in front of the TV, have dinner, rinse, repeat. Like, that's just, that sounds torturous. Yeah.
So what's next for Inebri-Art, and what's next for you?
So Inebri-Art has really been moving towards, so we do the mug paintings, the vendor markets, and things like that, the comedy shows. Comedy shows totally by accident. And I feel that keeps the lights on for now. I see content creation being what will keep the lights on in the future. So we are looking to do more of that. We have a Word document on the computer of just all these ideas that we've had for, movie scripts, show ideas, podcasts, and that's where Bar Talk Day Drinking came from. It was on the list, and we kind of gotten into a rhythm with the podcasting. We wanted to add something else, and so we looked at the list and was like, okay, what is just outside our skill set? That we can push ourselves and learn something new, but we're not going to be biting off too much.
Right.
And that was the obvious choice. So now we're looking at, okay, what's the next thing that we can create? So we have a show idea to spin off of Old Colony Cast, which hopefully I'm thinking we're going to film this summer and hopefully air this fall.
Wow.
And then we have some other Inebri-Art. We want to generate some more Inebri-Art video content. We've talked about maybe doing some comedy type specials. So that's kind of where the content is going. As far as events, we are hosting our first terrarium night on June 1st. So we're actually bringing in other people to work with us / for us. So that's kind of, and we're looking, I have a couple people out in Colorado who are trying to find me people out there because they have the highest brewery per capita.
Oh.
To run Inebri-Art events out there. Because, I mean, the idea is to make a real living, we need people to run events when we are either running an event or somewhere else, or I don't know, taking a day off. I have to.
What is that?
Yeah, I don't. What's next for me?
Yeah, what's next for you?
I don't know if I can separate the two.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, my youngest is graduating, and they're moving on to go to college for graphic design.
Wow.
Zoe does our graphic design work for Inebri-Art, which is great. It's not cheap, but it's great. So I suppose that's the next thing in my life. I was kicking around the idea of going away for a weekend, but I don't know about that.
Yeah, take a day off.
Yeah, I don't know. Right. I would still have my laptop with me the whole time.
Oh, take a break, Andy.
Yeah.
But that's okay. You love what you do.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to end it there. And I want to thank Andy for being here today. It's been such a pleasure having you and talking to you. We'll definitely have to have you on again if you're interested.
Oh, sure. Let's talk some pop culture.
Excellent.
Nerd stuff.
Let's do it. You've been listening to Open Here, a podcast produced by the local scene of Plymouth area community television. PAC TV is the community media provider for the Massachusetts towns of Plymouth, Pembroke, Kingston, and Duxbury. To see more of our content, visit pactv.org/thelocalscene. I'm Tiff Phillips. Thanks for tuning in. Let's hang out again soon.